When you and I are viewed as leaders, either by appointment or perception or by delegation, the fact of the matter is we are at the center of these movements. And there is no abstract movement that is moving ahead. There are individuals who are moving ahead, and therefore the cause of Christ is going on. It is for that reason I choose this subject as probably the most important that I could give to you, even if I were an expert in any other fields. As much as I love apologetics and love homiletics, preaching subjects and all of that, I don't think there is anything more important in your life and mine as Christian leaders than the leader and worship, because this will stress more of the being and then emerge into the doing.
When you think of the concept of leadership, do you immediately think of worshiping God? Leadership usually conjures up images of guidance, direction, maybe even servanthood. But as we'll see today, the quality of our leadership depends more on our personal worship of God than anything else. Hello, and welcome to Let My People Think, the weekly program featuring the teaching of Christian author and speaker Ravi Zacharias. Ravi is an apologist, a defender of the faith, who seeks to blend the domains of the heart and the mind. Today we'll begin broadcasting a workshop that Ravi taught, aimed at helping leaders understand the role of worship. As with any aspect of life, the role of leadership is lived out in the interplay between being and doing. On the one hand, leadership is something you do, and on the other hand, a leader is something you are. Both aspects are constantly working together, and it's in your personal worship and devotion that God molds your leadership, both the being and the doing. Here's Ravi to tell us more.
When you're talking about the whole area of being and becoming, we are always involved in what I call the dialectic of life. The dialectic meaning the two molds, the two poles of being and doing. You are who you are, not because of what you do. But the fact of the matter is you do what you do because of who you are. And sometimes the doing helps you become at the same time. Let me give you a simple example on that. Very often we say when it is hard to pray, that is the time for you to pray the hardest. What do we mean by that? What we're really saying is, look, don't wait for the feeling to come on before you pray, but discipline your life. And the more you discipline it, that feeling converges in your life. You do the same thing in romance and love with your partners. You don't always have to feel like pulling the chair for them or opening the door for them. You just do it, and in the process of that doing, you are also becoming, and it affects your being. And I think Jesus does this very often. He tells us to use our will. Seek first the kingdom of the Lord and His righteousness. You shall search for me and find me when you shall search for me with all your heart. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. As a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. Out of the heart are the issues of life. So you see, he brings in both of these facets, that by will you express your choices, but the heart is really the seat and the fountain of those choices that we make. So what I would like to do in these sessions is start off with the area of being, because ultimately a leader can only do if he is. And I am assuming that he is placed in a position of leadership, or she is placed in a position of leadership, because certain qualities of life have already been perceived, or potentials are seen there, which are going to be garnered and stimulated and provoked. So I would like to introduce you to two main thoughts as we begin. I was reading yesterday a comment by Eisenhower. Eisenhower, as you know, described the White House as the loneliest house in the world. But Eisenhower was talking about leadership, in which he said, ultimately, really, it is you trying to get your mandate done in your timetable, in your desires, and in your way, while the one who is doing it for you is doing so because he feels he wants to do it. And what you're really doing is motivating, inspiring, and leading somebody, but getting him to also express himself and herself in the process. So you're not violating the individual. You're in no way leading somebody contrary to what they want to do, but at the same time building them. Now, it might interest you to know, and this is very important, that as far as I know, I meant to double check it yesterday, forgot it, but in the Greek there, the word leader is only used 4 times in the New Testament, out of which 1 or 2 of them are negative usages, the blind leaders of the blind. But the word servant is used over 1,000 times, which I think is very interesting, and by an abundance of usage, I know we have hammered the servanthood concept to the ground, but it is significant that there is so much that is told to us in serving, and so little encapsulating the image that is conjured up sometimes and the connotations of the word leader. But let us think of it as a servant-leader concept, one who is both directive while at the same time humble and not manipulative, moving really in the concepts of biblical mandate. And one other final introductory thought is given to me by Richard Ellsworth Day, who in his book Filled with the Spirit says this: "It would be no surprise if a study of secret causes were undertaken to find that every golden era in human history proceeds from the devotion and righteous passion of some single individual. This does not set aside the sovereignty of God. It simply indicates the instruments through which He uniformly works. There are no bona fide mass movements. It just looks that way. At the center of the column, there is always one man or woman who knows where his God is and where he is going." Very interesting. There are no bona fide mass movements. It only looks that way. At the center of the column is a man or a woman who knows his God, knows her God, and knows where God is going. Now, this is not in any way to minimize the abstraction of mass movements. We do not need to minimize the individuals who are involved in the support structure. But the longer I am in the ministry, the more I begin to see that somewhere at the heart of what is happening is the deep commitment and devotion of one single individual. And whether you look at Methodism, whether you look at Presbyterianism, whether you look at the CNMA, whether you look at the Nazarenes, somewhere somebody was at the center of that column with a vision much larger than himself or herself and just seeking to go where God wanted them to go. And I'm sure all of them, if they were to stand today and look back at what has developed by their commitment, would be the first ones to say, we never dreamed that this is what would emerge from that kind of a devotion and passion. One has to wonder whether A.B. Simpson ever thought that one day it would be one of the largest missionary organizations in the world, particularly in countries of such need, such as Cambodia, Vietnam, and so on. So when you and I are viewed as leaders, either by appointment or perception or by delegation, the fact of the matter is we are at the center of these movements. And there is no abstract movement that is moving ahead. There are individuals who are moving ahead, and therefore the cause of Christ is going on. It is for that reason I choose this subject as probably the most important that I could give to you, even if I were an expert in any other fields. As much as I love apologetics and love homiletics, preaching subjects and all of that, I don't think there is anything more important in your life and mine as Christian leaders than the leader and worship, because this will stress more of the being and then emerge into the doing. The first thing that I want to say to you is that the concept and the subject of worship is extremely important in your life and in mine. And I will give you many, many reasons for this. Number one, there is the biblical injunction. In John chapter 4, when the woman at the well was talking to Jesus, it is interesting that we often see it as a passage of evangelism, and it is. Jesus going through Samaria, a rabbi talking to a woman of questionable repute and communicating with her. But the key to that whole passage is when Jesus says, "The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship Him." And he uses a very, very important word on worship here. We will deal with that later on. But Jesus' challenge to the woman is that this is the hour. for which I am here now. You have asked me, is it right to worship on this mountain or is it right to worship on that mountain? I say to you that the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. So Jesus calls for worship. Remember when Satan challenges Jesus on the temptation mount, what does Jesus say? Begone, it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord your God with all your soul and all your heart and all your mind, and so on. So as we look at John 4, in the concept of the woman at the well, and we look at the temptation episode in the New Testament, you see the challenge of worship really coming through from Jesus. Psalm 29 and verse 2 is probably the classic verse. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto His name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. And he goes on to describe the desire for God that He has for us to worship Him. Give unto the Lord the glory that is due unto His name. And I think he captures that in worship is really giving God that which is His due. It is not anything that He is requiring that is outlandish or in disproportion. That is precisely what is His due. As a matter of fact, the word worship, although I do not like this Anglo-Saxon contraction, and later on I will tell you why, comes from a contraction of worship. That's where the word worship really comes from. God is the one who is worthy of this. When you talk, for example, or look at the old prayer manual in the Anglican prayer book, you would see the man at some point in his marital vows using the word where he says to the bride, with my body I you worship. That is a very good use of the Anglo-Saxon word worship. And what the bridegroom is really saying to the bride at that point is, in the way I commit my body to you, it'll be a distinctive commitment, for you alone are worthy of that relationship. There is no one else with whom I can relate in the way I relate to you. And I like the use of that word. And so in context, when you are bowing down before God, you're really saying, you alone are worthy of this degree of submission and reverence and praise and so on. But God challenges us through the Word to demand that worship of us. And there are many, many other passages. If you look at the book of Revelation, they are cluttered with this idea that in heaven, worship will be our eternal occupation. And frankly, if we don't understand it, it is quite a boring concept. You take somebody who doesn't know what it is to worship and is barely able to endure Sunday morning 11 to 12, and say, I got good news for you. In heaven, this is what you're going to be occupied with all your life. That's about the worst news you could give them. Because for many of them, they have not yet come to recognize what it is. For to most of them, worship is something watched rather than done. It is a spectator idea where the performers come one by one onto the platform on the basis of which they are graded by the congregation. And at the end of the Sunday morning, the question of worship depends highly upon the merit and the performance level of those who delivered, while the others in the stands were watching and witnesses too. So there is a biblical injunction, and on that basis alone we can go on. But I would like to go into the psychological and the philosophical and draw on this. I've talked about the existential predicament. What do I mean by that? If you wanted to write one word equivalent for the word existential, maybe let me give you two words for it. I would call it the passion of existence. The passion of existence. In other words, whenever a philosopher uses the word existential, he is at least meaning your existence. Alright? He is at least meaning your existence. But in the classical term, what it really means is there is an awful lot of feeling and passion in this existence of mine. And if I can digress a little bit so that you can build a philosophical base on this as we go along. The fundamental difference between the Christian and the humanist or the existentialist is right here. The Christian, because of who he is, determines what he must do. The Christian, because of who he is, determines what he must do. I am a creature created in the image of God. Therefore, I shall not lie. I am a creature created in the image of God. Therefore, I shall not have an overly inflated opinion of myself as being a mini creator myself. I am a created, dependent individual. Essence determines existence, is the way I would put it for the Christian. Who I am essentially determines how I exist practically. If you were to go to the atheistic existentialist, and the reason I'm using atheistic before that is because sometimes you might hear someone saying Soren Kierkegaard was the first Christian existentialist. And if that is possible, what you're really hearing them say is Kierkegaard's Christianity was highly experience-oriented. That's all they're saying. He kept talking about his feelings in the Christian faith rather than coming up with doctrines. So if you ever asked a fellow like Kierkegaard to write out a doctrinal statement, he'll say, look, that is completely immaterial. I don't need to know anything about the eternal lostness of man. I don't need to know anything about the second coming. I don't need to know anything about the nature of God and this. All I want to tell you is that in my heart I feel a need, and that need is met as I serve God. That's all that matters to me. So, but I only explained that, but basically atheistic existentialism would say, what I do determines who I am. So if a man says, look, I find myself running around and being unfaithful to my wife, and you turn around and say there's something wrong with it, I say to you, what do you mean that's something wrong with it? I'm doing it, aren't I? We're all doing it, aren't we? And you see, this is where they're coming from. What I do determines who I am. It's what I call a salvation by survey syndrome. You know, you find out what everybody's doing, and on the basis of that, decide what everybody ought to be doing. It's the Masters and Johnson. What's average is normal, what's normal is average, and what everybody is doing is good, and just leave it at that. Now, there is this thing though. In my experience, what do I feel? I am a creature of feeling. I don't get up in the morning detached from my sensations and my desires. And may I suggest to you that one of the things we all feel, and sometimes the women are more honest in admitting it than us men, and young people are more honest in showing it than us adults, is what I call the feeling of loneliness. We all feel it. People sometimes think, they would look at someone like me as a traveler. You're always traveling, you're always around people, you're always being asked questions, you're always in a mass setting and so on. They think there is a tremendous sense of with-itness because you are with so many people. And yet, you get back to your hotel room at night and you are very lonely. There is something on the inside of you that the hundreds of people could not meet. The thousands of people could not meet. As a matter of fact, Elvis Presley, when he was asked to describe his life in one word, he said alone. With all of the thousands that surrounded him, look at these words that were found scrawled on an ink blotter at Wheaton College. At Wheaton College, out in the cold I stand, looking at the world sitting tight, with its people in their nice little world and friends who don't even know me. It makes no difference to their world where I am. If I'm there, it keeps going. If I'm not, it goes on. While I walk around wondering, my mind a mass of mixed up machinery, clashing with conflicts and unanswered questions. I don't ask if the world is real. It sits up there on its foundations, secure, concrete, hard, and stone and real. But maybe I'm not real. Or if I am, maybe I shouldn't be. They answer, smile, God loves you. But I can't smile. I'm numbed by the cold inside and out. Even the heat in the square brick buildings would only warm my body, nothing else. I'm alone in a world full of people, apart, shut up inside myself, cold, unfeeling, in a cold, unfeeling world. Now this is at Wheaton College with 3,000 students around you. This feeling of loneliness is man's existential dilemma, which basically tells me he is driving outside of himself for some kind of fulfillment. And my thesis is going to be how worship ultimately answers these needs that no other relationship can answer. And when I talk to young people constantly, that concept of loneliness and peer pressure is a tremendous force that they face, that desire to be accepted, that desire for meaningful relationships and all. Thirdly is what I call mystical reality. Mystical reality. I am coming to you from countries like Malaysia, which is Islamic, Thailand, which is Buddhist, India, which is Hindu. Where did all these religions come from? India has 330 million gods in the pantheon of Hinduism. And a new one's being churned out every day. And here is Buddhism in Thailand for thousands of years now, claiming to be Buddhist, having predated Christianity. We don't think in these terms, but I was driving through the streets of Bangkok with Margie and I said, does it occur to you that at the same time that Ezekiel was preaching in Jerusalem, Buddha was preaching in India? We don't put it within those contexts because we see these as such abstract philosophies never concretized in any individual. Where did the mystical nature of man come from? Why is he building altars? Why is he erecting temples? Why is he putting dots on his forehead? Why is he shaving his head? Why does he go through ridiculous motions during his marriage ceremonies and funereal ceremonies? Why are they sitting beside the Ganges, burning bodies and throwing spices on the body and taking the ashes in a urn and taking the water of the Ganges in a bottle? Mystical reality forces you and me to analyze what worship is all about. Why Christian worship and not Islamic worship? Why Christian worship and not Buddhist worship? Why is it that even people who are avowedly atheist will use the name of God at some of the most significant moments of political speeches? But you see, this mystical experience, sometimes in the laying of a wreath, other times in the burning of bodies or whatever it is, tells me I have to analyze what worship is all about. Fourth is what I call natural propensity. Natural propensity. There is, I think, this tremendous drive within myself towards the whole arena of finding meaningful relationships. There is a natural propensity within me of finding meaningful relationships. And as we look at some of those meaningful relationships, we find that there is a clue that relationship brings some kind of satisfaction. For example, for those of us who are parents, we need really no greater illustration than the fact that if you had to hug your car or hug your child, which is the one you spend more of your time doing, although you may invest a lot of money in your car, and although you value your car because money is congealed life, and you have expressed that expression in the purchase of a good home or a good car. But when you see your house burning, your first concern is for someone whom you are related to in there. And the tragic moments of life are nowhere near as tragic as when relationships are severed, either by sin or by death. So there is that relational clue which I think drives me. What does the songwriter say? Heaven above is softer blue, earth around is sweeter green, something lives in every hue, Christless eyes have never seen. There's the clue to me. It is because of how I'm related to Him that the skies look bluer, the grass looks greener, and on the basis of that dimension, this horizontal experience takes on more meaning. So that natural propensity and a relational clue, I think this is very, very significant. And this is where I believe the Christian faith has it over all the other systems of the world. Buddha never talks about having a personal relationship with Him or with God. You will never hear of Allah as a personal God being related to you. Hinduism never ever talks of a loving God in Hinduism. Christianity is the only unique faith. As a matter of fact, when my second lecture at the Ramkhamhaeng University in Thailand, I said, if you were to give me some problems in your life that makes you confused, it was called Man's Search for Meaning. I said there are at least three. You are confused between eternity and finality. All right? There's eternity in your heart, but there's finality in your experience. And they agree with that. I say you're confused between the personal and the impersonal. You are a personal individual with personal needs, but the whole world sort of treats you in an impersonal way. So if you have an accident on the middle of the highway, the last thing in their mind is whether you are hurt or not. They want to make sure that you've got a good insurance policy to take care of the bumper that has been smashed. And how do you struggle with personal and impersonal? I said, so you struggle with the eternal and the final, you struggle with the personal and the impersonal, and then you struggle between freedom and enslavement. The more you seek freedom, the more enslaved you become to yourself. I said, so it seems to me the answer to life is somebody who can deal with this. So what I'm giving to you is an eternal God with a personal relationship who gives you the strength to be truly free.
What's the most important aspect in the life of a leader? His or her personal worship of God. How can we lead others in the way of the Lord if we're not close to God ourselves? If God has placed you in a position of leadership, or if you feel a call towards leadership, make sure you spend time with Him. As Ravi said, there's no more important part of a leader's life. Well, Ravi's message from today is available in its entirety as part of a 2-CD or 2-cassette album. When ordering, ask for CD or cassette album 209, The Leadership Workshop on Worship. Again, that's CD or cassette album 209, The Leadership Workshop on Worship. When you place an order, ask for your free copy of Ravi's newsletter, Just Thinking. The newsletter contains articles by Ravi and members of his ministry team that can be a helpful tool for understanding the issues of our day and for engaging the culture around you with the gospel. Now, there are a few ways to reach us at RZIM. You can visit our website at rzim.org, where you can learn more about Ravi's ministry, read insightful articles, and visit the online store. That website again is rzim.org. You can also call us. Our order line is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-448-6766. That's 1-800-448-6766, and we'll be glad to help you there as well. If you prefer to write, address your envelope to RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia 30010. That's RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia 30010. If you listen in Canada, that address is 50 Gervais Drive, Suite 315, Toronto, Ontario, M3C 1Z3. The Canadian address once again is 50 Gervais Drive, Suite 315, Toronto, Ontario, M3C 1Z3. Please be sure to give us the call letters of the station when you contact us. That helps us to better evaluate the effectiveness of the broadcast. This weekly program, Let My People Think, is a listener-supported radio ministry and a production of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries of Atlanta, Georgia.